Hello again. We are in the UK's most easterly town, Lowestoft in Suffolk. A short walk away, the old and new industries of the sea and the land. A bird's eye factory, which incidentally churns out 750 potato waffles a minute. And Orbis Energy, a specialist in harvesting offshore oomph. Towering over both, a solitary onshore turbine, its blades carving the sea breeze. And behind it, on the horizon in the North Sea, a battalion of its offshore cousins turn two. On our panel here at the Players Theatre, the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, the Conservative MP Gillian, the Chief Operating Officer at Adnams, the Suffolk-based brewer, hotelier and wine merchant, Karen Hester, the journalist and soldier who became a Labour MP, Clive Lewis, and the writer, political commentator and LBC radio presenter, Ian Dale. Lowestoft, your Any Questions panel. And Richard Boakes with our first question. Hi, Richard.
Hello. Does the panel agree with Chris Whitty's finding that health in poorer coastal communities has been overlooked by governments? And if so, what should be done about it?
So this was a report that was published last month by England's Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, saying a national strategy is needed to tackle poor health and lower life expectancy in seaside towns. The report saying coastal communities have been long overlooked with limited research on their health and well-being. The focus has tended towards inner city or rural areas with too little attention given to the nation's periphery. Richard, thanks for your question. Ian Dale first.
Well, the simple answer is yes, but it's not just in health that coastal communities are overlooked. I've been chairing a series of seminars over the past few months on the Levelling Up agenda, which Justine Greening has really been promoting. And one of the issues which we've been talking about is how different parts of the country are being left behind. And the government seems to think it's just sort of the northern red wall seats that need levelling up, but it's actually a lot of areas on the periphery of the country. And I think the problem is that when you talk about coastal communities, everyone has this sort of idyllic view of coastal communities, as if they're all sort of happy little villages and everyone gets along and it's all rather nice. And in many cases, that is absolutely true. But there are pockets of poverty in areas which we all think of as being quite well-to-do. I was a Conservative candidate in North Norfolk back in 2005, where you look at some of the coastal communities along that North Norfolk coast, it's not all Chelsea-on-Sea and Burnham Market. You go to Munsley, for example, and there are some real areas of poverty there. You look at Cornwall, for example, as well. Really poor communities. It's not just health that needs levelling up, it's lots of other things. The education system, providing opportunities for youngsters to be able to stay in these communities rather than feel that they have to move away if they're going to get on in life. And so that it goes much wider than this, I think.
Clive Lewis.
Yeah, I think his report was broadly right, correct. I think it's something many people understand. I think when we're talking about the levelling up agenda, I agree, it does seem to be disproportionately directed in terms of big kind of infrastructure projects in the north, in the so-called foundation or red wall seats. I don't like that term, but that's what they're called. But if you look at coastal communities, they are different. It is complex. But the thing I feel that we need to start talking about now is understanding that the biggest danger for all of us in this country, on the planet, is the climate crisis. And we have a unique opportunity at the moment to be able to combine investment in communities like this one, which have concerns about rising sea levels. We know that the sea defences here and along the coast around here are a big issue. We have an opportunity to be able to tackle inequality, increase the infrastructure in a sustainable way, and give people and communities local power to be able to decide, let government decide the what and let local people decide the how, so that we can create these green jobs, which are sustainable, which are about decarbonisation, which are about mitigation and adaptation to the climate crisis, and at the same time tackle those inequalities and those health inequalities. And I think that's the perfect thing. And I think, there are lots of people now in politics who are talking about green jobs, green jobs, green jobs. That has to be the future. It can't be business as usual. And I think it's an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah. Clive, I hear politicians talking about green jobs, and what is a green job?
It depends. And I think a green job, and it does, because I think a lot of people think a green job is retrofitting a home and turning it into a more eco-friendly, low-carbon home. That's part of it. But, look, we've got an ageing population. A green job is also a well-paid, high-paid job in the care sector. We've got a crisis in our social
How's that
care
a green
area.
job?
So,
I mean, it's an important job, but why is it green?
I'll tell you why it's a green job, because it's a low carbon job. It's not about consuming. It's not about pumping out greenhouse gases. It's about looking after people. These are things that we need to do. And other jobs could be renewable sector, transport jobs. The list is endless, but there are lots of jobs out there which you can define as green jobs, which, kill two birds with one stone, as I said.
Karen, let's bring you into the conversation next. I mentioned that you work at Adnams, but you're also a member of an academy trust. You helped set up a sixth form college. How do you reflect on the question from Richard about coastal communities?
I think, having lived in Suffolk all my life, and if you look along the coastline, I think there is a myth that it's a lovely place to live, and it actually is a lovely place to live, but with that comes complexity. So, for example, if you do a 15-mile radius round Lowestoft from exactly where we're sitting, from a jobs point of view or transport point of view or any point of view, actually you've already lost 50% because you're in the North Sea. So actually, I think there is already restrictions because of the natural coastline. That means for our youngsters, so I'm talking particularly about the sixth form college in Lowestoft, where I was vice chair and helped build that. It's great to get the youngsters there, but they're so restricted. If you want to get on in this world, you're so restricted because you have to travel so much further because you are on the base of the North Sea. So I think it is a lot bigger than green jobs or anything. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Ian. So everyone says Cornwall's the most popular place to go, South Wold's the most popular place to go, so is Aldeburgh, but not for a job, because there's only half the jobs because they're on the coastline. So I think it is much bigger than people realise.
Gillian Keegan for the government. Take on Richard's question and then answer the critique that both Ian and Clive reflected on, that perhaps the government is obsessed with what are described as the red wall towns at the expense of coastal communities like this one.
Well, I think there is definitely an understanding that inequality can occur anywhere, and it does. And there's also a real understanding that talent is all over the country and opportunity isn't. And they are really at the basis of levelling up. And it is, all these inequalities are really, the levelling up agenda is really focused on that. And it's not just about the north. I represent a south seat, although I am from Liverpool. It is not just about cities. It's about rural poverty, it's about coastal poverty, it's about all of the other inequalities that we've seen, both in health, but also in education, in opportunity, full stop. I mean, I grew up in Knowsley, that's always down at the bottom of every list or the top of the deprivation list. And you saw it everywhere. There was massive inequalities. And actually, it hasn't changed much over the years, because that's the other problem, really, really entrenched inequalities. Is
that a government failing, or is that a society failing, or a community failing?
I mean, it's all of them, I guess, to some degree. But, investment is always what, people will talk to, and say about, we need investment, etc. Now, I know in this area, this is one of the areas where the hospital, I think it's in the next door constituency, James Paget Hospital, is going to be redone, rebuilt, etc. That will hopefully help with some of the health inequalities. But then you've got investment in a lot of things. East Coast College, that's had a lot of investment, actually, a lot of investment locally, but also from the government. There's continued investment in that, investments in the schools and the academy school systems, but also investments in job opportunities. So obviously we've got the fishing, port infrastructure, all of those things coming. They're not easy. None of this stuff is easy. And so, I will get to the green jobs, because I actually co-chaired the Green Jobs Task Force, so I will get to
can
that
I just
as
ask
well.
you, it's picking up on that green jobs point, and I take the point that none of this is easy, but just as I was asking Clive about green jobs and what that means, because it's a phrase we hear tumbling out of the mouths of politicians all the time, levelling up is this other phrase that we hear a huge amount about. When will Lowestoft know that it's been levelled up?
It's a very good question and one that I intend to answer. When every kid has got the opportunity to go to a good or outstanding school, that's the first thing. So when we came to power in 2010, 68% of kids across the country went to good or outstanding schools. Now it's 86%. It has to be 100%. When every young person has an opportunity, whether it's an apprenticeship like I did, age 16, or whether it's going to university, now more than 50% of our young people do go to university, when they have a good opportunity to get a good job and then to get a better job. When every old person or every, let's say, mid-career person has the opportunity to retrain, that's the lifetime skills guarantee that we have announced, started, but we will roll out the country. When everybody gets a chance to go to a skills boot camp, that's something else we've announced, which you can get these skills in all kinds of things, including green jobs. That's how you'll know. And also when you see your new hospital and when you see the fishing industry revived or you know, whatever the investments are. And the jobs is what one of the things I've mentioned, whether that comes with the renewables focus here, with Sizewell C, obviously that's a huge investment. You may or may not like it, but it is a huge investment, and nuclear is part. And nuclear is part of our energy strategy.
Excuse me, sir, if you're tempted to shout out, our listener at home or in the car won't be able to hear you. So if you hold your thoughts, and by all means contribute towards any answers on Saturday afternoon. Clive Lewis wanted to come in before we move on to another question.
I was going to ask the question, is there any point in the government's agenda when levelling up actually would include levelling up of the inequalities of wealth in this country, which are growing have grown during the pandemic? We've seen more billionaires created than before, and we've seen poverty increase. I know in my own constituency in the last 5 years, we've seen an increase, an almost doubling of the number of children living in poverty. It requires an England footballer to get the government to feed children during a pandemic in our poorest communities. When does levelling up mean levelling up economically and in terms of inequality? I mean, I think it's a question a lot of people will be asking this government.
Back to Gillian in a second. Karen, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Lowestoft used to be a thriving fishing town. It used to absolutely, people were not out of work. I think what Suffolk needs and what people need now is a job.
Well paid.
Whether it's green or not green, what we have to do is provide employment for everybody.
OK. Gillian, briefly, and we'll move on.
Yeah, and obviously that is part of the, you know, the investment. And the Port Infrastructure Fund, I think, is obviously focused on trying to revive the fishing industry over the next 5.5 years. Obviously, we've got that time because of the deal that's been done with the EU. But that's part of the investment. And it's investment that we're bringing to the town, plus renewables. And of course, Sizewell has been. I mean, I've spoken to a number of the apprentices who are working on that and you know, training for that. In fact, I've spoken to people whose, you know, fathers have decommissioned, their grandfather built the first one and they're now building the second one. So, you know, it is about opportunity and making sure those opportunities are there. I mean, clearly, you know, I left school in the 80s in Knowsley. There were not many opportunities, and that is devastating for young people. And we obviously need to make sure that there is not, you know, that we do focus on youth employment and opportunity as well.
Thank you. We're going to switch topics. If you want to join the Saturday afternoon conversation on any answers, as I mentioned, here's the number, 03700 100 444, 03700 100 444. You can ring from 12:30 on Saturday lunchtime. And Anita is back, and she's on the radio at 2 o'clock. Question 2 from Judy Ellard. Hello, Judy.
Hello. What can be done to help the people of Afghanistan?
Clive Lewis, let's come to you first on this. You served in Afghanistan, and you've spoken particularly passionately just today, in fact, about interpreters.
I did, yeah. And I think, you know, look, I'll be really clear. I served there, and I think on the issue of Afghan interpreters, it's a complete and utter moral failing of this country and government that we are leaving people who served with me, who sweated with me, who patrolled with me, who faced the same dangers that I did, who are now being hunted by the Taliban. And we're told that many of them, it's for things like refusing to clean the toilets, that many of them were let go. And these people are now facing an appalling future. And I think, you know, look, I can look back, hindsight's a great thing, and I can say that as a war of occupation. We did try to, I went there for the right reasons, I think. I went there because I wanted to help the Afghan people. I wanted to protect my own country. But I can also see some of the follies of the Afghan war. And ultimately, if you're going to make a mistake, at least see it through. What we've done is we've made a big mistake and we've half-heartedly walked away, half-cocked, and haven't done the job properly. And we've left the Afghan people in an awful situation. And I think as a country, we should hang our heads in shame, not just in the way that we are leaving those interpreters, but in a way that we, along with our allies who went there, who promised the Afghan people that we would help rebuild their country, protect them from those that were trying to attack and hurt them, I think we walk away from there with our heads hung in shame. It's been an abject failure, and I think this country can learn a lot of lessons from the fact that if we want to have a place in the world of global leadership, of advising and offering, telling people what to do, but helping and working with them, then blowing them up and dropping bombs isn't the answer. Building things and developing them is the answer. Again, you know, you've got a government, our government, which has walked away from Afghanistan, and at the same time, you know, cutting the aid budget.
Okay.
I just find the way this government's acting internationally, if this is global Britain, then it's not a global Britain that I'm particularly buying into.
Let's stay on the specifics of Afghanistan and unpick your analysis there. What would you have done? I listened with intrigue when you said you think it was probably right that the UK went in the first place and the role that you, alongside many others, played. But what should have happened? Should forces still be there?
To be honest, I think when we look back at the war on terror, as it was called, and 9/11, the response of the United States and the Western world, including this country, was probably wrong. I think it has probably caused more...
So we shouldn't have gone into Afghanistan?
I think when you look at our response to 9/11 and what happened and who was responsible, I mean, let's be honest about it. One of the main drivers of 9/11 was Saudi Arabia, who we're busy arming.
Okay,
so let's be consistent here. If you're going to have a foreign policy, and you have a decent point, be consistent.
But on the specifics, Claire, and I'll bring in your fellow panellists in a second, but I'm just trying to get to the specifics here. So in the round, you conclude perhaps it was a mistake to go in. Given that the UK did go in, and given the situation, the decisions made recently about coming out, would you have kept forces there or not? British forces, and of course there's the decision taken by the US president as well.
So it's once you're in, it seems to me that you have an obligation to try and ensure that there is stability in that country.
That means
I know that there are many people who have served, Dan Jarvis, others, who have written about this, that the approach that we and our allies took to Afghanistan, the energy, the efforts, that the international efforts we put in terms of not just rebuilding the country, but more in terms of the diplomatic side, trying to find a diplomatic solution, wasn't sufficient. We didn't go in with an end game. We didn't know how we went in, and there was no extraction point, no end game. And that was always going to be a problem. If you listen to most of those people who have assessed and analysed Afghanistan, we never had an exit strategy. And the exit strategy we do have is one that, unfortunately, it seems to have failed.
Ian Dale, next.
I was about to say I agree with every single word that Clive has said until kind of the last bit, because I think the danger that we have now is that because of what happened in Iraq and to an extent what happened in Afghanistan, the signal has been sent out that we should never intervene anywhere in the world ever again. And interventions sometimes are necessary. You look at Kosovo, you look at Sierra Leone, which I think most people would say were very successful interventions. We were right to go into Afghanistan, but I think Clive's right. What happened then, it didn't really work. I think he's also right to say that the decision to abandon Afghanistan now is craven, it's weak. We follow the United States in that decision. I think Joe Biden made absolutely the wrong decision there, because what we've done is we have left the Afghan people to the mercies of the Taliban, and the Taliban will take over most of the large populated areas of Afghanistan, even if they don't quite manage to do it in Kabul. Now, what does that mean? That means that there will be yet another flow of people leaving Afghanistan to seek refuge elsewhere. Now, the world has a massive migrant problem at the moment, which no one knows how to cope with that. And again, Clive was right about the cut in the aid budget. Afghanistan is, I think I'm right in saying, the biggest recipient of UK aid at the moment. Well, are we now going to cut off aid to Afghanistan now that if the government there falls? So this is a catastrophe of epic proportions, I think, and you can blame no one but the politicians who've made these decisions.
Would it, though, Ian, have required, if governments were to adopt the approach you suggest, of a very honest conversation that Joe Biden or the Prime Minister here might have had to have, which would have effectively added up to saying, we're going to have to leave our troops in there forever?
Well, we went in there. That was our decision. And whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision, we then owed something to the Afghan people. We particularly owe it to the people that helped us, as Clive says, the interpreters. And there are many other people that don't get the same headlines that they've had. People who help the international media, for example. They're being targeted now by the Taliban as well. Actions have consequences. And if you take a decision to withdraw your troops too early, you have to live with the fact that there will be dire consequences from that, human consequences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Karen, next. You started your career in the army, didn't you?
I did. And I served when the Falklands War was on. So, to be honest, I detest any war. Lives are just wasted, excuse me, boys, but over politics. I just think that if the country makes a decision, any government makes a decision, then it must follow it through. And if they did that with everything, whichever government it was, there would be a lot less confusion in the world. I mean, it was on the news today about people having their fingers cut off and stoned in the streets and hunting for the forces. I mean, that's a terrible way to live, quite frankly. But we did commit to it, so we should have seen it through, and it's as simple as that, really.
And also, what was it all for? If you were a member of the families of one of the British soldiers who was killed in Afghanistan, was it 455? I apologise if I've got that figure wrong, but it was certainly many hundreds. What are you to think? What was it all for? What was the sacrifice that your family member made for his or her country, and indeed for Afghanistan? What was it for if we now abandon ship?
Gillian Keegan, I guess that is that's the central question here, isn't it? Particularly, as Ian says, for the families of those who lost their lives, seeing what's happening in Afghanistan now and wondering if they didn't already wonder, was it worth it?
I think that's always a question you have, actually, with any war. I mean, this one's been going on for 20 years. Obviously the situation's changed as well over time. Was it the right thing to do to go in? I don't know. I mean, fairly where we are now, there's no easy answers. You know, what do we do? 20 years, it's clear that there's not the military solution's not working. What do? We stay there on our own? What impact can we have? You know, we don't have an awful lot of options, really. And clearly, the only thing we can focus on is a negotiated peace settlement. Now, you know, those are words that clearly is the right thing to do. Clearly, it's where we all want to end up. And clearly, that's what Afghanistan needs. And clearly what the people of Afghanistan need, who have gone through the most terrible pain and suffering and are now going through the most terrible pain and suffering again. Mm-hmm. But that's where we have to focus, because the military solution is not working. And I don't know what's going to change to make it work. That's the difficulty. That's the difficulty we're all facing. Now, to answer the question, I think, you know, we do owe obviously a debt of gratitude to the interpreters, to all the people who supported us and supported the UK troops. And we have adopted a new policy, which is the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy. And we have had 2,300 people who have come, with their families and are now creating new lives in the UK. And clearly we need to step that up. And there's been lots of focus on that in the press, and there's been lots of work to do that. Mm-hmm. And to just go to Ian's point in terms of aid, humanitarian aid is obviously always prioritised. So, you know, it's still intended that,
Sorry, the money that... You've just cut the budget.
Yes, but we still spend £10 billion. We have, Ian, but we spend £10 billion.
Spending £14 billion.
We were spending £13 billion.
A lot of the poorer areas of the world are suffering. People are dying because your government has made that decision. It was a manifesto promise. You stood on that manifesto, and yet you're quite happy to support a cut of a third in the aid budget.
And because what we've done instead is we have invested, the coronavirus has changed a lot of things. We have invested, we've invested in the AstraZeneca vaccine, which 1/3 of all vaccines all over the world are that vaccine.
2%
Ian,
of the
please
world
don't
have been
interrupt me, just let
vaccinated.
me finish.
You spent
Then we're also
£382
sending...
billion on COVID, and you're quibbling about £3 billion for an international aid budget.
We spent much more than 382 billion. We've spent 407 billion.
I think one of the
but let me, if I could just get the point out, as well as the 10 billion that we're spending this year, we've invested in the vaccine, we've invested in COVAX, and we're just in the moment sending, we've pledged 100 million vaccines, and we're just sending 9 million vaccines all over to different countries around the world.
Let's keep focused on the question of Afghanistan.
But that's on top of the 10 billion.
Sure.
That's more money. It's on top.
It's in terms of aid. I think, look, we're hosting COP26 this year, where we will be telling many in the global south and the developing world to not go down the dirty route of industrialization and to trust us that we will share our technology, that we will help you get over this dirty phase so that we can keep, so we can have our dirty phase, but you don't, and then you can jump over it. That's what we've been promising them. And yet, at the same time, this is a government that has done the dirty on the world with other Western governments on the COVAX agreement, which was to give billions of vaccines to people in the global south. Around about 2 or 3% of the global south have been vaccinated. But here, we're asking people to trust us when we're hosting COP26. We've just cut our foreign aid budget by 50%, and we've shafted them on the vaccine project.
Right,
Why would anyone trust this government on an environmental deal in Glasgow in November?
Okay, let's try and keep focused on Judy's question on Afghanistan. Karen briefly, then back to Gillian, and then we'll move on.
So to focus it back on the Afghanistan question, if the country decided, or the government decided that the strategy was that we want peaceful negotiations, then maybe common sense would say, leave the soldiers there until the negotiation is done.
On their own.
Gillian, one final question to you. I noticed you said, and I know it was years and years and years before you were in politics, that you weren't sure whether the going into Afghanistan in the first place after 9/11 was actually a good idea. It's quite striking hearing that from a government minister.
Yeah, as you say, I've been an MP for 4 years, and so 20 years ago I had the luxury of sitting there and having opinions. But it is difficult. That I found all of the 9/11, the response to 9/11, my personal viewpoints at the time. I was not in favour of the Iraq War. I was sceptical about the reasons. This is before I was a politician. And, I often, when I was first a politician, there was a potential that we may have to vote on something like this. And I think they are the most difficult votes in Parliament, and it's not easy for any politician to have to vote either to go in or not. Syria now, because we didn't vote to go in, we're obviously now looking at that thinking that was a mistake. So whichever way, it's the most incredibly difficult personal vote. And I'm not looking forward to when the first one I have to make, if it's just the magnitude of it is overawing.
Thank you. It's Any Questions on Radio 4 with Chris Mason. We're in Lowestoft in Suffolk in the company of Gillian Keegan, you heard there, Government Minister, Clive Lewis, Labour MP, Karen Hester, businesswoman, Ian Dale, broadcaster, and Adam Robertson with our next question. Hi, Adam.
Hi. Is Keir Starmer repudiating Corbynism and Corbyn by calling on Labour to embrace Blair's legacy as Prime Minister?
Adam, thank you. Clive, I think, on this one.
Just repeat the question, I didn't quite catch the last bit of it. Is
Keir Starmer repudiating Corbynism and Corbyn by calling on Labour to embrace Blair's legacy as Prime Minister?
Well, look, I think one of the things that Keir has done, and I think I will be very honest here, is he has spent perhaps the last 18 months telling us what he isn't, that he isn't Corbyn's party and that he isn't Corbyn's protege. And now he's telling us who he thinks he is more like, or wants to be more like, which is Tony Blair. The problem is that Jeremy Corbyn and Tony Blair are two of the most unpopular Labour leaders in public opinion, and Tony Blair is below Jeremy Corbyn. So I don't think it's probably that I didn't think it would be the best idea to kind of move away from Jeremy Corbyn and then move towards Tony Blair. Perhaps what would be a better idea is to define himself as to who he is and what his vision is, rather than looking to the past and the golden hits of political wonders of the last 20 or 30 years. So I think ultimately with Keir, look, he needs to define what it is, not his values, but his demands. What are his demands for change in this country? And what does he want to see? And, I know 20 years later, I can tell you back in the 1997, 1996, what Tony Blair's and the new Labour government's was. It was education, education, education. I cannot tell you what my leader thinks. I wish it was green jobs, green jobs, green jobs, but have a demand and then focus and then build around that. No one expects detailed policy. But I think ultimately, if he wants to shift to the right again, if he wants to pick fights with parts of his party and kind of displacement process, then I think ultimately the public don't really want to see a Labour Party tearing itself apart. They want to see a Labour Party that can hold this government to account as an effective opposition and a potential government in waiting. That's what I want to see, and that's what he should be focusing on.
Aren't you... Help out our listener who says... You're saying the Labour Party shouldn't be tearing itself apart, and here you are on national radio slagging off your leader. I'm not slagging him off. I'm giving a piece of advice, and I think that's the thing. Look, we're a political party. We're not a kind of one. Unanimous mind. Inside parties, there's an opportunity to have political discussion and debate. That wasn't slagging Keir Starmer off. That was giving him advice. There's a difference. If I was slagging him off and saying that, what was, he was getting... There are things... It's been a very difficult 18 months. No one can deny that. Okay. But there have been opportunities that have been missed. And, look, we have an election coming up in 2 to 3 years. It's looking pretty difficult for us. We need a strategy and a route map, where we can actually start saying to the public, we can see an option for a Labour-led government at the very least. And at the moment, that's a hard sell to the public because of the situation we find ourselves in. Indeed we do. Hear, sir. A shout from the floor about a demand for a quote-unquote progressive alliance. One very quick final question to you, Clive. I noticed that a little while ago you gave Keir Starmer, I think it was a D-. What effort grade or letter of the alphabet would you attach to him now? Have you revised up? Is he hitting the heady heights of C+? Or?
Do you know what? When I answered that to your colleague Andrew Sinclair on the BBC Politics show, I immediately regretted it because. So I'm not going to repeat the mistake today. Look, it's a very difficult situation that he has found himself in. But I think ultimately, you can't just blame Brexit or the Corbyn years for the situation the Labour Party finds itself in. The malaise for Labour goes deeper. It's the part of the breakup of the United Kingdom, the rise of the SNP. It's part of the story. The fact that we have an electoral system that overwhelmingly favours the Conservative Party. We lost on a 3-to-1 ratio in the last century compared to the Tories. There are deeper structural issues here. I wish I could see more of that analysis from our leadership and then developing a strategy based on the reality that we find ourselves in, rather than wishing back for 1997 or 1945. That's not going to happen again.
Thank you, Clive. This is an interview that Sir Keir Starmer gave to the Financial Times where he talked about Labour. The Labour Party should be very proud of Tony Blair's record in government. And then he said, we shouldn't be focused on internal rows. Ian Dale.
All successful political parties are big tent coalitions, parties that can include the likes of Clive, but also people on the Blairite right of the Labour Party. In the Thatcher years, you had people who were devoted supporters of Margaret Thatcher like Norman Tebbit, then you had Ken Clarke on the other side. You look at America, Ronald Reagan got elected because he attracted a lot of Democrats. And the problem for the Labour Party at the moment is it is still living in the shadow of the Corbyn years. And Clive is right to say that it goes back way beyond the Corbyn years, these sort of structural problems that the Labour Party has. But if Keir Starmer is repudiating the Corbyn legacy, well, I would say that's probably a good thing. Corbyn lost 2 general elections, although you listen to his supporters and you'd think that they'd actually won them sometimes. We should remember that Tony Blair is the most successful Labour leader ever. I mean, Harold Wilson did win 4 general elections, but he wasn't in power as long as Tony Blair. Tony Blair won 3 landslides. And if people in the Labour Party think there's nothing to learn from Tony Blair and just think that he is the devil incarnate, which a lot of people on the left of the Labour Party seem to think, well, he got a lot of Conservatives to vote Labour in 1997. That's why they got a massive majority. This seat, I think, was Labour in 1997. I mean, it's almost unthinkable that this seat would now go Labour, but it needs to if Labour are to win an election. And that's the massive electoral mountain that they've got to climb. Now, I have a little bit of sympathy with Keir Starmer. He became leader at a very difficult time when lockdown had literally been a week old. Now, nobody is expecting him to come up with a sort of whole manifesto during a pandemic. And his first 8 months as leader, I think, were quite successful. But something happened at Christmas. I don't know what it was, and he just lost it. And he's got a problem in that he's not very charismatic. But if you look back in history, both in this country and the United States, a charismatic prime minister is usually followed by a dull one. And then there's a charismatic one again, and then a dull one again. So, I mean, he's got that in his favour, I suppose. But he also, Clive, again, I keep saying Clive is right. This is, I agree with Nick, it's becoming like that.
Used to it, Ian.
But the thing is, if you interview Keir Starmer in a non-political setting and where he can talk about himself a bit and you get to know him a bit better, he's actually very engaging. Yeah. He's actually a genuinely nice guy, which he's got, and not all politicians are. Gillian's one that is a nice person, and she has to sort of bat for a very sticky wicket sometimes. But like tonight. but he's got to somehow connect with people. Politicians who don't connect with the electorate very rarely get elected as Prime Minister. Neil Kinnock couldn't do it. Tony Blair could do it. Gordon Brown couldn't do it. Ed Miliband couldn't do it. Jeremy Corbyn could to a certain group of the electorate, but it wasn't a big enough coalition to win.
Gillian Keegan, what was it, do you think, about Tony Blair that appealed to people in Lowestoft back in 1997?
I've no idea because actually I didn't like Tony Blair. Most people did. I don't know. I just looked into his eyes and didn't believe him. I was nothing to do with politics at the time. He just was too smooth for my sort of Scouse
And yet for millions and millions of people who had voted Conservative for years, it worked from Labour's perspective.
It did. So yeah, he wasn't my kind of politician. Actually, I deal with his son a lot now because after his pledge to get 50% of young people to university, Ewan is now trying to work to get everybody great apprenticeships. So I work with him a lot on that. Yeah, I don't know what they saw in him because honestly, and it was just a personal thing, I can see that many people thought he was great and, you know, you could see all that sort of cool Britannia and all of that thing. I liked Oasis when they went round, so I could see that worked. But no, it's a very difficult job that Keir Starmer has. He actually, when he first started, said he admired Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson was the role model, which as I was brought up in Huyton, I thought that was kind of interesting because we've got statues to Harold Wilson everywhere. But it's a difficult job, and how to keep your confidence when everybody's shouting at you and telling you that you are, you know, a terrible person is really hard. So I do have a lot of sympathy with him on that count.
Thank you. Karen Hester.
My answer's really short to this, really. I disagree with Ian in that I have no sympathy for Keir Starmer whatsoever. If you're going to put yourself up for a leadership, then for God's sake, lead.
I suspect Clive agrees.
No, I'm just saying, ouch. That wouldn't come out of my lips.
Pithy answers. I do like a pithy answer now again. 03700 100 444 if you have a pithy contribution to make to any answers or a longer one. 03700 100 444. Lines opening at 12:30 on Saturday lunchtime. We head to our next question from Wendy Brooks. I think, Wendy, you're on Lowestoft Town Council, yeah? Hi, Wendy.
I am, yeah. I know that Adnams have spoken out against Sizewell C and its potential to devastate Suffolk's tourist industry, an area of outstanding national beauty. What do the panel think? Do we need Sizewell C, or are the negative impacts far too great?
Wendy, thank you for your question. A fascinating one, this, because it taps into so many strands of conversation about quote-unquote levelling up, as we were discussing earlier, bringing in lots of potentially well-paid private sector jobs, how it works in terms of the balance of the regional economy, the place for nuclear energy in the energy mix, and then, of course, the role or not of China as an investor. Where shall we start on this? Karen Hester. I hadn't even spotted your hand was up, but yeah, there it is. Karen.
Hello, Wendy. Yes, you're quite right. Adnams have said that it will indeed damage an awful lot of our environment, but it is more than that. We've got Sizewell A, we've got Sizewell B. Why do we need C? So my personal opinion on that is that if you think of it like an iPhone, what we did learn through COVID was that technology is moving really fast. So the digital transformation of organisations, I mean, I didn't know what a Zoom meeting was before March the 23rd last year. Or a Teams meeting. So technology's moving so fast. This is going to desecrate the area but take a decade or more to build. How do we even know that 10, 12 years down the line that they're using the best technology? Think of your iPhone. You get an iPhone and people are queuing up for the iPhone 12. In 2 years, it's out of date.
Yeah, but you need electricity to charge your iPhone, don't you?
But yes, you do. Well, I don't know. It might be gas-powered by then. However, yes, you do, but we have got Sizewell A and we have got Sizewell B. And with regard to the jobs, what we want is a country that is looking long-term, because they will be jobs for a short term. And what they'll actually do is they will take jobs from the hospitality and the tourism industry in East Anglia. People will go there for the bigger money, but they're unlikely to get a career out of it. And it will just put all the hospitality industry in trouble in Suffolk. So
a shouted question about whether when the wind doesn't blow, and I suppose it's that argument that if you have a new nuclear power source, it is a consistent source of electricity.
Well, I'd like to know whereabouts you live, because on this coast I've never known the wind not to blow.
Ian Dale, let's bring you in next. Karen there was reflecting on the kind of the potential impact on the regional economy. There's geopolitics in all of this as well, isn't there? The role of China or not as a big investor in the nuclear industry, something encouraged when David Cameron was Prime Minister, raising more eyebrows now. What's your take on this question and then that broader question of the role of China?
Well, let's start on China. Theresa May had an opportunity to stop Chinese investment in nuclear power when she first came into office, and her late lamented Chief of Staff, Nick Timothy, was very much in favour of stopping this, but he didn't win the argument. I wish he had. I wouldn't let the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party within a country mile of any of our national infrastructure, whether it's nuclear, whether it's water, whether it's other forms of electricity. And we are going to rue the day that we did this. And I mean, David Cameron gets a lot of bad press at the moment, but I think that was probably one of the worst things that his government did to encourage all of this Chinese investment. Now, just briefly, because I know we're running out of time, on Karen's point on the hospitality jobs possibly switching, well, obviously, a lot of hospitality jobs are minimum wage. A lot of them have been from Eastern European people who come to this country over the last 20 years. I would suggest that maybe if they were paid a little bit more, they might be encouraged to stay in the hospitality industry rather than defect.
A spokesman for China's foreign ministry told the BBC that it's in the interests of both sides to conduct practical cooperation in the spirit of mutual benefit and a win-win result. Ian, just one follow-up on the China thing, because this gets to the crux of the political argument, is that if you go down the route of saying don't have China involved in these strategic interests, and there might be a very powerful argument for saying that, if the consequence of that is higher electricity bills, for instance, that's then a hard sell, isn't it, politically?
Well, of course it is, but that's not necessarily the consequence. Why is it that we have to have the French or the Chinese or whoever investing in our nuclear industries? Why can't we do it ourselves? If this whole idea of global Britain is to mean anything, surely you have to start with your own national infrastructure and decide how that's going to be funded and then decide how it's going to be paid for. You do not go cap in hand to a country which treats its people appallingly, like China does, and conducts a genocide against the Uyghurs. Sometimes you have to take a moral stand on these issues.
Thank you, Ian. The suggestion is the Chinese could take a 20% stake in Sizewell C. Let's bring in Clive Lewis. Is a job at a new nuclear power station, Clive, a green job?
So look, I think on the issue of nuclear, I come from an extremely pragmatic point of view, which is You know, look, the harsh reality is coal, oil and gas kills and is killing more people as we speak through the impact on the climate and overheating and air pollution than nuclear ever has in its entire history. That's the first thing. And we have a choice to make. You know, we have to, A, reduce the consumption of energy and at the same time reduce our carbon output. And that means that we have some hard decisions to make. Renewables have to be at the forefront, but nuclear is a part of that solution. That surprises many people, but I don't want to see a nuclear power station like Hinkley C or Sizewell C, which is again being funded by big corporates outside of this country or anywhere in the world. It should be funded by our own government. But again, you can have different technologies. The technology that they're using here is awful. It has failed where it's been used already. It is full of problems. So why aren't we using the latest technology, modular technology? Integral fast reactors are something that people are now looking at. Why are we going down this kind of white elephant, huge, humongous, £18 billion cost route? Okay. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But what I will say, there are other factors, very quickly. Give local people a say over what kind of technology, what kind of energy is going to be generated in there. Have them have a say over it and make sure that it's sustainable. At the moment, I just don't think that's happened.
Time for me to give Gillian Keegan a say, because we've just got a minute left. Gillian.
Thanks very much. Well, nuclear is a key part of our energy strategy. It is needed for energy security, and also it is required to reach net zero. We won't reach net zero unless we have nuclear
and
as well.
Chinese investment?
Well, I mean, EDF have long-term investors are the Chinese, but we are aware that there will be other funding models available, and I know there's lots of discussions that are ongoing.
Is there going to be a decision on this?
I don't know when there's going to be a decision, but there are discussions which have been ongoing from the beginning of the year, and they'll continue to be ongoing.
And your hunch, go with China or not?
I wouldn't give a hunch on something this big. I mean, you know, if there was
I
an
didn't
easy
think you would,
answer,
but I thought I'd try.
But if there was an easy answer, someone would have found it, right? And that's what I've found about politics in my 4 years in politics. If there was an easy answer, somebody would have found it. All I get is difficult problems, not easy answers.
Thank you, Gillian. Gillian Keegan there. You heard from Clive Lewis and from Karen Hester and from Ian Dale. In a fortnight's time, we are going to be in Haddenham in Buckinghamshire. Next week, it is Lee in Greater Manchester. 03700 100 444, the number for any answers. From here in Lowestoft in Suffolk. Thank you for listening.